My name is Emily, and I've spent most of my life chasing the things that keep us up at night. I run a YouTube channel where I dive into the darkest corners of history, murders, hauntings, and mysteries that refuse to be explained. I've always been fascinated by the line between the real and the impossible, the place where science stumbles and faith takes over. But there's one story that's haunted me more than any other, one that makes me question everything I thought I knew about the world. It's the story of Anneliese Michel, a young woman whose life was torn apart by what some call a demonic possession and others call a tragedy. This is the tale of the exorcism of Anneliese Michel, a nightmarish journey that still sends chills down my spine. Buckle up, because this one's going to stay with you long after the video ends. I first heard about Anneliese when I was a teenager, flipping through a book on the paranormal in my local library. Her name was tucked into a chapter about exorcisms, alongside grainy photos of a young woman with hollow eyes and a smile that didn't quite reach them. The book said she'd been possessed by demons, subjected to months of grueling exorcisms in 1970s Germany, and died in the process. It was the kind of story that sounded like it belonged in a horror movie, not real life. But the more I dug, the more I realised this wasn't just a story, it was a documented case, with court records, audio tapes, and eyewitness accounts. Anneliese Michel was real, and what happened to her was so terrifying, it inspired films like The Exorcism of Emily Rose. I've spent years researching her case, piecing together the fragments, and tonight I'm going to take you through it, step by step, as if I were there, because once you hear this, you'll understand why I can't let it go. It all began in Klingenberg, a small, devoutly Catholic town in Bavaria, Germany in the late 1960s. Anneliese Michel was born in 1952, the daughter of Joseph and Anna Michel, a deeply religious couple who raised their 4 daughters with strict Catholic values. Anneliese was bright, kind, and devout, the kind of girl who prayed before meals and dreamed of becoming a teacher. She was 16 when things started to change. It was 1968, and she was at school when she had her first seizure. Her body convulsed, her eyes rolled back, and she collapsed, unconscious. Her classmates were terrified, but when she came to, she brushed it off, embarrassed, but seemingly fine. The doctors diagnosed epilepsy, a condition that wasn't uncommon, but carried a heavy stigma in a small conservative town. They prescribed anticonvulsants, and life went on. Or so it seemed. The seizures kept coming though, and they weren't like anything the doctors had seen. Anneliese would freeze mid-sentence, her body locking up as if something inside her was fighting to break free. She described feeling a weight on her chest, like an invisible force pinning her down. At night, she started waking up to strange sensations, shadows moving in her room, whispers that seemed to come from the walls. She told her parents she felt unclean, like something was inside her, watching her. Her mother, Anna, was a devout woman who believed in the power of evil. She started to wonder if this was more than a medical condition. Maybe, she thought, this was spiritual. By the time Anneliese was 20, the symptoms had escalated. She was studying at the University of Würzburg, trying to live a normal life, but the seizures were relentless. She'd fall into trances, her body contorting into unnatural shapes, her voice dropping into a guttural growl that didn't sound human. She began to see things, hideous faces leering at her from the corners of her vision, figures that vanished when she tried to focus on them. She described a burning sensation in her throat, a hunger she couldn't satisfy, and a hatred for religious objects. Crucifixes made her recoil, and she couldn't step foot in a church without feeling like she was suffocating. Her family took her to neurologists, psychiatrists, anyone who might help, but the medications didn't work. The doctors started to suspect schizophrenia or hysteria, but Anneliese rejected those diagnoses. She was convinced something evil had taken hold of her. In 1973, the Michels turned to the church. Anneliese's behaviour was growing more erratic. She'd scream obscenities in a voice that wasn't hers, tear at her clothes, and eat things like coal and insects. She'd stare at her family with eyes that seemed to belong to someone else, and she'd speak of demons, naming them: Lucifer, Judas, Nero, Cain, Hitler, and a fallen priest called Fleischmann. Her parents, desperate, contacted their local priest, Father Ernst Alt, a man known for his interest in the supernatural. Alt observed Anneliese and was struck by what he saw. She wasn't just ill, she was fighting something inside her, something that seemed to know things she couldn't possibly know. He petitioned the Bishop of Würzburg for permission to perform an exorcism, but the church was cautious. Exorcisms were rare, even in the 1970s, and required rigorous evidence of possession. The bishop denied the request, but Alt didn't give up. He kept watching, waiting. By 1975, Anneliese was a shadow of herself. She was 23, but she looked decades older, her body gaunt, her face hollow. She'd stopped eating, claiming the demons wouldn't let her. She'd spend hours on her knees, praying until her knees bled, begging God to save her. Her family was falling apart. Her sisters were terrified. Her father was skeptical but helpless, and her mother was consumed by guilt, believing she'd failed her daughter. Father Alt, now convinced this was a case of true possession, brought in Father Arnold Renz, a more experienced priest. Together, they appealed to the bishop again, and this time they got approval. The exorcisms began in September 1975 under strict secrecy. The church didn't want publicity, and neither did the Michels. But what happened in that house over the next 10 months was anything but quiet. I've listened to the audio recordings of those exorcisms, and let me tell you, they're not something you can unhear. The tapes, 67 sessions in total, are grainy, filled with static, but Anneliese's voice cuts through like a blade, or rather, the voices. There's her own, soft and pleading, and then there are the others, deep, guttural, mocking. They snarl, they laugh, they curse in languages Anneliese didn't speak. The priests chant in Latin, their voices steady but strained, while Anneliese screams, her body thrashing against the restraints her family used to keep her from hurting herself. The demons, if that's what they were, taunted everyone in the room. They claimed to be ancient, powerful, and delighted in Anneliese's suffering. They said she was theirs, that she'd invited them in through sin. Though Anneliese was known for her piety, the priests demanded their names, and the voices complied, listing the 6 I mentioned earlier. Each session lasted hours, sometimes days, and left everyone exhausted, except the demons, who never seemed to tire. I tried to imagine what it was like in that house, night after night, as the exorcisms dragged on. The Michels' home was modest, a 2-story building with wooden floors and crucifixes on every wall. Anneliese's room, where most of the rituals took place, was small, with a single bed, a desk, and a window that looked out on the quiet streets of Klingenberg. But inside, it was a battlefield. The air was thick with incense and fear, the room lit by flickering candles that seemed to dim when the voices grew louder. Anneliese would writhe on the floor, her body bending at impossible angles, her nails clawing at her own skin. Her mother would sob in the corner, clutching her rosary, while her father stood by the door, torn between doubt and dread. The priests, drenched in sweat, would recite the rite of exorcism, their voices hoarse but unyielding, and through it all, Anneliese fought. She'd cry out to God, to her mother, to anyone who could hear her, begging for release. The demons, or whatever was speaking through her, knew things. They'd recount sins the priests had committed years ago, private moments no one could have known. They'd mock Father Olt's faith, telling him he was damned. They'd whisper to Anneliese Michel about her own fears, her guilt over Anneliese's suffering. One night, according to the tapes, a voice claiming to be Judas said, "She belongs to us because she doubted. She doubted God's love." Anneliese screamed, denying it, but the voice laughed, a sound that still makes my skin crawl when I hear it. The priests tried to cast the demons out, commanding them to leave in the name of Christ, but the voices only grew louder, more defiant. Sometimes Anneliese would go quiet, her body limp, and everyone would think it was over. But then she'd bolt upright, her eyes black as coal, and the voices would start again. As the months passed, Anneliese grew weaker. She refused food, claiming the demons forbade it. She'd drink her own urine, crawl under furniture, and howl like an animal. Her body was covered in sores, her joints swollen from constant contortions. The priests urged her to eat, but she'd spit out anything they offered. Her family was desperate, but they trusted the priests, believed this was God's will. The doctors, when consulted, were useless. Some said she needed a hospital, others said there was nothing they could do. By June 1976, Anneliese weighed less than 70 pounds. Her face was skeletal, her hair falling out in clumps, yet she kept fighting, praying, even as her body failed her. The priests performed 2 exorcisms a week, each one more grueling than the last, but the demons didn't leave. If anything, they seemed stronger. I keep coming back to one particular tape, recorded in May 1976. It's different from the others, quieter, almost intimate. Anneliese's voice, her real voice, not the demons, comes through, weak but clear. She's talking to Father Renz, pleading with him. "I want to be free," she says, her words slurred from exhaustion. "I want to live. Please, help me." There's a long pause, and then a voice, not hers, cuts in, low and venomous. "She's ours," it says. "You can't have her." The priest starts praying, but the voice drowns him out, chanting in a language no one could identify. The tape ends abruptly, and when the next session starts, Anneliese is screaming again, her voice raw, like she's been torn apart from the inside. By July 1st, 1976, Anneliese was dying. She hadn't eaten in weeks, her body ravaged by starvation and seizures. The priests performed one final exorcism, but it was different. Anneliese was barely conscious, her breathing shallow, her eyes half open. The voices were gone, or maybe they'd won. She whispered something to her mother, something about seeing the Virgin Mary, about being at peace. Then, at 8:15 a.m, she took her last breath. She was 23 years old. The official cause of death was malnutrition and dehydration, but the autopsy revealed more. Her body was covered in bruises, her knees shattered from hours of compulsive genuflection, her organs failing from prolonged starvation. The house fell silent, but the questions were just beginning. The aftermath was a storm. The Michels and the priests were charged with negligent homicide, accused of letting Anneliese die by prioritising exorcisms over medical care. The trial in 1978 was a media circus, with prosecutors arguing that Anneliese had epilepsy and mental illness, treatable conditions that were ignored. The defence claimed she was possessed, that no doctor could have saved her. The audio tapes were played in court, and even the skeptics flinched. The voices, the screams, the sheer terror. It was undeniable, even if you didn't believe in demons. The priests and Anneliese's parents were found guilty, but their sentences were light, probation and fines. The court couldn't decide what had killed her, science or something else. I've read the trial transcripts, listened to the tapes, studied the photos. I've talked to people who knew Anneliese, though most don't want to talk anymore. Some say she was mentally ill, a victim of a family and a church that failed her. Others believe she was truly possessed, that the demons were real, and one in the end did. I don't know what I believe. I've spent nights lying awake, replaying those tapes in my head, wondering if those voices were Anneliese's mind breaking or something darker, something that doesn't fit into our neat little boxes of reality. What I do know is that her story isn't over. People in Klingenberg still talk about her, about the house where it happened. Some say they hear screams at night, see shadows in the windows. The Michels never recovered. Anna died in 1998, still believing her daughter was a martyr. The priests stood by their story until their deaths. I keep a photo of Anneliese on my desk, one from before it all started. She's smiling, her hair tied back, her eyes bright with hope. I look at it when I'm editing my videos, and I wonder what she'd think of all this. Her life reduced to a horror story, her pain, a cautionary tale. I wonder if she's at peace, or if she's still fighting, somewhere beyond my reach. The tapes are out there, if you want to listen, but be warned, once you hear them, you can't unhear them. They'll follow you, creeping into your dreams, whispering in the dark. Anneliese Michel's story isn't just a mystery, it's a warning. Some battles aren't meant to be fought, and some doors, once opened, never close.